Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 1, Episode 6, The 3 Ego States and Which One to Be In to Get a Yes from Your Prospect. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. But before we get going here, how does my hair look? Do I look good? Everybody loves me. Just kidding. Go to flipthescript.co first thing and download the deck so you can follow along. Let's get going. I am really excited about today's topic, primarily because who is more of an expert and who better to deliver the message on ego states than me? You know what I'm saying? Let's start with an agenda. There's going to be 3 different pieces to today's agenda. Number 1, we're going to cover the 3 ego states that every single person has within their body. So if you are awake and you are alive, you have these 3 different ego states in your body and you fluctuate through them without the day. So we're going to review of what each one of those are and the characteristics of each one. Second bucket we're going to go into is when you are in an ego state, which ego state does it draw out in another person? So that could be a prospect, that could be a friend, that could be a romantic partner. But basically we're going to cover when you're in what ego state does it attract in another human being when you're talking to them? And then the third bucket, we're going to finish off with examples of communication in each ego state so that you can avoid the 2 dangerous ego states and stay in the one that's most likely to get a yes from your prospect. So let's jump in. First, let's start with the 3 ego states. So this is all based off of Eric Berne's research, the author of Games People Play, and his view on transactional analysis and psychology. But basically, he uncovered in that book, you have 3 different ego states in your body. You have parent ego state, you have adult ego state, and you have child ego state. So you've got all 3 of those, and the one that you consistently want to act in, regardless of whether you are, in a work environment, regardless if you're communicating with someone that you're dating, regardless if you're communicating with a friend, you want to make sure that you're an adult ego state because that is the most logical ego state that you can be in, and it draws out a very rational action within your prospect. So parent, adult, and child. So full disclosure, maybe I just screwed up the rest of the session. You're not going to watch it, which is fine too. But adult ego state is the one that you want to strive for in all of your conversations, especially whenever you're cold prospecting. Within your parent ego state, Eric found that you have 2 ego states. You have nurturing and you have controlling. So nurturing, we're going to get into a little bit later, but it's, think of the parent that wants to sing their child to sleep. And then controlling is someone who wants to enforce curfews, for instance. And then within your child ego state, you also have 2 ego states. So you have natural and you have adaptive. Natural, think someone who's impressed by very little, bubbles, roller coasters, etc. And then adaptive, think of the rebellious side of your ego state. So again, all of these are going to be within your body. And dependent on the situation, dependent on how you're responding to something, you're going to be in one of these 3 ego states over here on the left-hand side. So let's start with the characteristics of each one of these ego states so you have a better chance of knowing which one you're in. So the parent ego state is going to have the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are copied from the parent or parent figure that you had whenever you were a child. So whenever you think of your parents, you probably think of one of the 2 of these. Typically one fits into one more than another, but they kind of fluctuate back and forth. But it basically is you emulating your parent figures whenever you were growing up and characteristics of them down to the psyche level whenever you grow up. So you kind of saw the imprint or the match of or the outline of what a parent should be or what you think that a parent should be whenever you're younger based on how your parents behaved. And so you are copying those behaviors into your adulthood. So there are, 2 pieces, nurturing and controlling. Sorry, I'm blocking with my big old head all of these wonderful words over here. But let's start with nurturing and a couple of different characteristics of that. Nurturing, again, think of the parent that, you had a bad dream and they came in and they sang you to sleep and they sat there with you, while you fell asleep because you had just had a nightmare. So this is characterized by someone, the ego state that is very, very compassionate, someone who's caring. They seek to organize and create safety, but basically the entire mission in that ego state is that you want to take care of other people, whatever means that means. And that is going to be copied off of how you saw your parents or parent figures take care of you whenever you were younger. The second piece of the parent ego state is going to be the controlling ego state. So think about someone who, again, enforced curfews or said you need to do this thing on time, But this is characterized by the ego state where you are authoritative and you're controlling and you're seeking to create order and compliance. So I'm going to quick reminder to everyone. I know that a lot of times at least whenever I was first reading all of this theory, I thought, oh, this ego state is actually me. All of these ego states are you, and you traverse into each one throughout the day, sometimes one more than others, but you have all of these tendencies within you. So again, the controlling ego state and the parent ego state is characterized by being authoritative and controlling, and you seek to create order and compliance within that ego state. The second main ego state over here is going to be the adult ego state. So this, again, is the one that we always want to be communicating in. This is characterized by the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are in the direct response to what is going on right now. So you're not future tripping, and you're not thinking about the past and being super, anxious about the future and then worried about the past and holding on to the past. But you're in the here and now, and you are seeking to, the characteristics is someone or the ego state that is logical, rational, and seeks to plan, observe, and analyze. So this is the kind of ego state that you want to be in whenever you're talking to your prospects. And it's also the kind of ego state that you want to be in terms of when you are buying things, because this ego state cannot be shook up, right? It cannot be controlled by some smooth words. It's the ego state that is logical, rational, and you're seeking to put the details to plan, observe, analyze, grab data, but really make the best decision for yourself in the here and now and understand what's the best plan forward. So this is the one that is the most predictable within prospecting. So you want to make sure that you're constantly operating in this ego state so that you're, getting whiplash from the conversation. The third ego state, like head ego state, is going to be your child ego state. So again, just like the parent ego state, this is mirrored off of the behaviors and thoughts and feelings that you had when you were a child. So you don't subsume the behaviors of another child and say, like, that's my child ego state. It's how you were whenever you were a child. So you have two ego states within your child ego state, natural and adaptive. And let's dig into a couple of characteristics of both of those. So start with natural. The natural ego state is a fun ego state. Emotive, creative, fun, spontaneous, impulse buy, seeks to find, you can read the slide here, but you're trying to find new ways and bring fun to the party. So this is the ego state whenever, you're the life of the party, you want to be spontaneous, you want to go out on a limb. So think when you're checking out at the grocery store and you see this gum and you want that gum and that impulse purchase, like that is the child natural ego state. So this appeals to you to make like kind of brash decisions, make something that's not super data backed, just based on pure emotion. So that is why grocery stores always put those purchases like candy, think gum, think of magazines that are up near the cash register. It doesn't just have to be food, but this is basically an ego state that goes ahead and makes a purchase without having all the details and facts and et cetera. Because it doesn't matter in the child ego state. It doesn't matter in the child ego state if it's a logical or rational decision. It matters that you want it, and so you're going to go get it. So I've seen this hash out in a couple of different ways, but really high emotional purchases, for instance, is going to be characterized that you are in the child natural. So it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to do, but it means that you, from the purchasing decision perspective, it means that maybe it was a good decision, but maybe it wasn't because you made it based on emotion. So you just want to be cognizant of this, of like, if you desire something, that you are transitioning into the adult ego state whenever you're talking about, whenever you're thinking about logic and rational, and like, are there actual hard details as to why I should make this purchasing decision? And you compare it along with the desire that you have and not purchase just based on desire alone. The last ego state is going to be child ego state adaptive. So this is kind of a fun one. This is the rebellious side of your nature. So think about someone, if I say, do not push this button, the first thing that everyone who's watching wants to do is push the button, right? So whenever you tell someone to do something, that naturally it's going to draw out in someone of like, I want to rebel. So everyone has this piece in them, this ego state in them, like all of them, but it's rebellious. It's an insecure portion of ego state, but it seeks to basically undermine authority is the whole goal and the whole the whole pith of this ego state is basically, I want to undermine authority. I want to get attention that way. And I want to play to the crowd and I'm going to rebel by doing so. So there's a lot that goes into this one. In both, especially in adaptive ego state, it's a call out for attention a lot of times of like, I'm going to do this rebellious thing so that I can warrant the attention of someone who matters to me. But essentially those are the five, two subheads, and main ego state is, again, in review: parent ego state, adult ego state, child ego state. Parents got 2, nurturing and controlling, and then child has natural and adaptive. So now that we know the ego states, why don't we go into which one attracts another one in your prospects? So having that information of what's going on is one thing, but leveraging it in a conversation is a completely different ballgame. So whenever we're talking about the parent ego state, again, for the nurturing portion, think of someone who's singing someone to sleep. If you are in the nurturing portion, you are calling out to the natural ego state in your prospect. So basically the natural, ego state within the child ego state is someone who wants to be taken care of and someone who, is fun loving and just wants to have a little bit of fun, is creative and spontaneous. So a nurturing is associated with natural, and then the controlling ego state, which again is someone who wants to enforce deadlines, someone who wants to give out discipline, someone who wants to say like, hey, this is the curfew. You're going to call out in the adaptive ego state, the child adaptive ego state in your prospect. So if I'm nurturing, a lot of times that can turn my prospect into, they're the little kid in the situation. And then the controlling ego state, if I'm trying to say, you need to do this on time, the first thing that they want to do is they slip into child adaptive and they want to rebel. Adult is pretty cut clean, adults to adult. So whenever you talk to someone in a very respectful manner, I've noticed, I'm from the South, when someone opens the door for me and I walk through that door, I always am very respectful back to the person who opened the door. So usually, instead of trying to push someone into a different ego state or push someone to try and do something, the only thing in life that you can really control is yourself. So you want to start with yourself and say, which ego state am I in? Because that is going to call out the associative ego state in my prospect, right? So I don't want to try and get them into adult ego state by saying, this is unfair and you should act like an adult. You should start acting like in the adult ego state yourself, and that will attract the adult ego state mindset, thoughts, feelings, etc. in the prospect or person that you're talking to. So adult is associative with adult. The last ego state is going to be the child ego state. So again, when you are acting in the natural ego state, meaning, you're acting fun and spontaneous and you're saying all these things that are really creative, etc., you are calling out to, in the person that you're talking to, the nurturing parent ego state within them. So if you want the nurturing parent ego state and you want to be taken care of, then, spontaneity, creativity, etc. are all litmus tests of which ego state you're in and which one you're calling out in your prospect. And if you are in the rebellious side of your psyche, like basically you're in the child adaptive within your ego state in your body, then you're going to call out to the controlling parent. So someone who's rebellious is calling out to the deadlines and to the parent to walk in and say, hey, the curfew's 10. This is the time that you should show up. This is the time that I need something done. But that is for all human beings. So this isn't just in prospecting, but this is just in general the associative properties, the associative ego states that happen. So now that we know all of that, we know the ego states, we know which one calls out to another one, and we know we want to be in the adult one. How do we know how to get in the adult one? And most importantly, how do we know when we're not an adult? So here's a couple of examples that I have seen in prospecting by itself. Sorry, I'm having a hard time of where I go so you can see the whole board. Which part do you want? Just kidding. See, I'm in child ego state, natural child ego state. So the parent ego state has 2 portions again, parent controlling, a couple of good examples, and I put a few examples here that I've seen very common in the community, prospecting community. But commanding your prospects is a big one. So if you are commanding your prospects to do anything, or anyone in your life to do anything, it is going to call out again to the child adaptive, rebellious side of their nature. So if I tell you to let me know, the first thing that you don't want to do, especially if you're not my authority, you're cold calling into me, is not to let you know. If I say, give me a call back, and I command you to do it, you naturally slip it, your prospect naturally slips into child adaptive and says, I don't want to give him a call back. You should buy this. Oh, I got the perfect feature for you. You should buy this. Then your prospect is going to say like, I don't want to buy that thing because they just told me to. And then the last one here is you can do some kind of reversal property of like your prospect says like, oh, okay, well, this looks good. Let's say you're at the end stage of a negotiation and your prospect says, this proposal looks good. Everything in your nature is going to say, great, then go ahead and sign here. Like, I'm salesperson, you just said it was great, so I'm going to try and get you to sign here. And it triggers child adaptive. And so your prospect says, oh, well, I want to talk about, this pricing thing again, or this, customer success piece, or, deadline of when you're going to deliver this thing. So again, if your prospect says look good, I wouldn't go immediately for the close. I would do another kind of reverse where I basically said, tell me why you wouldn't sign this deal. What looks not so great? What doesn't fit in, etc. So if you're going to have your prospects reverse, have them reverse in the right direction. But this is a good list of places where you're commanding your prospects to do anything. Even if it's sign the deal, again, naturally, they're going to want to rebel and they're going to want to not sign the deal because you told them to do it. A few examples that I see is putting the accountability when reps put the accountability on their prospect for not responding. So let me unpack that a little bit. A lot of times in breakup emails, I see people say like, hey, Tom, I've reached out 7 times and you haven't felt the need to respond back. So could you just give me, there's 3 options here. Either number 1, you were swallowed by a shark, 2, you're on an island, or 3, you just don't value data in your team. Can you tell me which one so I can update my CRM? Tom is thinking on the other end of the line of like, it's not Tom's fault that he's not responding, right? Tom's not responding, not because he's a bad person. Tom's not responding because you weren't relevant enough, compelling enough, or didn't have a good enough value prop to where Tom felt the need to respond, right? So if you put accountability and associate the reason that they're not responding with them and them being a bad person, then all of a sudden you're trying to police what's going on in the situation and you make them naturally want to rebel. So a great example is like, hey, did you see my last email with the prospect? Some of these are slighter, but it triggers the wrong feeling. Did you see my last email? I've sent you a couple of emails and did you see the last one? And your prospect's thinking like, yeah, I did see the last one, but like I didn't respond kind of thing. And so it makes them feel guilty and again wants to rebel. Did you listen to my last voicemail? I've tried calling you multiple times, but haven't heard back from you. I just want to update my CRM with this information. Can you please just respond back, etc. So all of these are cold calling tips or cold emailing tips, but they're things that I very commonly see done where you're like, did you get my last voicemail? Or like, what's going on? And the reality is they probably did get the voicemail, but they didn't respond again because we didn't hit the nail on the head. So anytime you're commanding your prospects or putting accountability on them for not responding, it's going to trigger child adaptive in them and make them more than ever not want to respond to your message. Let's talk about parent nurturing. Very, very good in theory, but again, it's going to call out to child natural, which is a very fun, spontaneous, ego state within our prospects. But not going to get an action done. So, and on a side note, when you go into parent nurturing, oftentimes, especially if you don't know someone, this can come off as placating. So I mentioned a lot, but I am from Texas. And sometimes if someone walks up to you and says, bless your heart, it's a really nice thing to say, but the person feels placated and all of a sudden they don't want to be a part of the conversation anymore. So I put a couple of examples here. Number 1, saying you're sorry that something negative happened without any action to fix it. This is a big one on customer success lines and a big one in the sales process. But when something happens that it didn't go according to plan, or you didn't fulfill a contract, or you didn't do something, number one, I call your attorney. Just kidding. Number one, I would, say that you need to think about, like, instead of just saying sorry, without any action to fix it, or without any like agenda of like, how can we plan and how can we rationalize and like make an actual agenda here to where we can get you to where you want. If you say you're sorry that something had happened without any action, then it's basically you're just placating this child. You're saying to someone on a customer success line, I'm so sorry for your loss, or I'm so sorry that happened. And the person ends up getting more frustrated because you didn't actually fix their root problem. Number two, saying you're thankful for someone's patience. I hear this a lot on lines again, where they say, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. And you've been on the line for 42 minutes. So it sounds good in theory. It sounds really nice, like you're being a parent nurturing, but saying thank you for the patience when you've been on the line for 42 minutes obviously doesn't solve the problem, doesn't put a plan into action. So it can frustrate your prospects and make them not want to deal with you in the future. Three, placating your prospect. I've seen this one, asking for the real decision maker. Sometimes when we're in the parent nurturing ego state, we want to take care of someone, but we also don't think that they have a lot of validity. So I know that we're after finding out who the decision maker is in the process. It's irrevocably invaluable to us to understand that information. But the way to get that information is not to ask the person to their face. If they are the decision maker, they're thinking, yeah, but so what? Would you not talk to me if I wasn't? If they aren't the decision maker, you just disempowered the only person that you know at the organization. So asking a person, are they the real decision maker, is disempowering. It can come off as, I'm the parent and I am singing you to sleep because I have the authority to do so. Even though it's good in our theory in our head, it can cause the wrong feelings, within the child natural ego state. So now let's talk about being a kid. Child ego state has, again, two ego states, child adaptive and child natural. Child adaptive is going to call out, again, to the parent controlling ego state of your prospect. It's not, again, it's not necessarily that bad of an outcome, but if you're not an adult, you're not calling into adult for your prospect. And so it's very, very off record, and you can get kind of jerked around in the sales process. So you want to make sure that you're always an adult. You are always behaving an adult, so you call out to adult in another. Child adaptive, a great example is telling your prospect or your boss or anyone that something is unfair. So when you were little, you would say, okay, I have a brother, his name is Chuck, and Chuck would get something. He would get a dessert or something, and I would go march up to my mom and dad, and I would say, Mom, Dad, Chuck got dessert tonight, and I didn't get it. That's unfair, as an insult to them. And even if it was like categorically like we didn't get the same thing, the parent ego state digs its heels in and says, I don't care if that's unfair. Like, I'm the boss, I'm the authority, and so doesn't matter if it's unfair. This is what I said. So think of when a child says, like, they go to reach and touch a hot plate. The parent says, don't touch that, commanding them to do something. They rebel in child adaptive and say, why? And then the parent controlling gets even more mad and says, because I said so. Because you're a child ego state and you're a child in that situation. And so they simply don't want to deal with you anymore. So don't tell, a good tip of advice here, whether it's your prospect or your boss, don't tell them that something's unfair. Leading questions. This is a big one, especially in the sales cycle and later down the funnel. But basically, whenever you're asking questions to prove an agenda, or I once heard a sales leader say, it actually was pretty shocking to me, but I was watching this panel happen, and the sales leader said, you want to be playing chess against your prospects. You basically you are playing a game of chess and kind of like engineering and calculating your moves. And my first thought was, why am I playing against my prospect? I should be playing fun games with my prospect and be an advocate and be on their side, but I certainly shouldn't be playing something against a prospect. Prospects are not the enemy. Prospects are our friends and someone that we value, right? So we want to make sure that when we are having conversations with them, especially within cold prospecting, when you're cold calling, that you aren't asking questions in a way that's leading up to something. This is prevalent in a lot of conversations. Certainly, I've done it in the past. I can think of top of mind 3 times that I've done it in the last month. You want to make sure that when you are asking questions to someone, that you are asking them out of very genuine nature, out of genuine curiosity, because you want to know more. Because if you're in sales, you should want to know more about your prospect and what they're doing. But you are not asking these questions to blame them, to criticize them, or prove an agenda. So a quick tip here, if you want to know if you are in child ego state or if you are in adult ego state, whenever you review the conversation in your head, ask yourself, what was the motive of that question? Was I asking that question because I wanted to know more? Or was I asking that question to strategically set up the chessboard so that I could win against someone? So that should give you a quick tip of which ego state you're in. And then the third one in child adaptive is insulting your prospect, making him feel stupid, saying, does that make sense? You must not be the decision maker. I've reached out to you 3 times and you respond, so you must not be the decision maker, because the decision maker would respond. A big one over here, correcting your prospect. I hear this a lot on the phone. People are cold calling in and they say, for instance, hey, I'm calling in my former company. I was working with Chorus, and I would call in and I would hear people say a lot like, oh, well, I'm using Outreach, for instance. Outreach is a sales engagement software. Chorus is a conversation intelligence software. They're not competitors. They actually work really well together. And so I would hear on the phone sometimes, if I wasn't careful, that I would, instead of pattern interrupting and getting through that objection, I would have the innate desire to say, well, Outreach isn't a competitor of ours. Don't you know that? And start to correct my prospects. But what that would trigger in them, I was in child adaptive, and it would trigger parent controlling. So what the conversation would go like is this: hey, we're all set. We're using Outreach. I would say, Outreach isn't a competitor of ours. We're actually a conversation intelligence software. And they'd be like, hugs for the education, but this call is over. They don't want you to update them. It's not, I don't know if I'm going to be crazy for saying this, but it's on record, so let's just do it. It's not your job to correct your prospect's grammar. I would argue it's not anyone's job to correct anyone's grammar unless you're an English teacher and you're in school. So correcting your prospect on anything, whether they say they gave up the valid objection to their best understanding of what a competitor would be, whenever they were understanding from your value prop who you are. And so instead of just brashly leading through and saying like, hey, they're not our real competitor, you can do a pattern interrupt and kind of re-gear the conversation. I'm not going to go into the semantics of it. Another discussion for another time of how you can pattern interrupt. If you go to the session on shallow objections and how to counter them in a way that gets you the meeting, I go into a little bit more depth, but I would never correct my prospect. Another one is saying that isn't what you really do. Your prospect says, oh, we actually already have a training software, and telling them that that's not what you do. You're always going to be in child adaptive, which means you're going to trigger parent controlling and get them to want to enforce things upon you and say no to you more than they say yes to you. And then the last one here we've got is a good old fun child natural. So a couple of great examples of this. This is the least detrimental to your prospecting, but still not a great place to be. You always want to be, again, with an adult. But I see a lot of people, for instance, they are personalizing without being relevant. So the prospect's like, hey, thanks so much for knowing something about me, but that isn't really relevant to, what I'm doing as a buyer persona. So you will get a lot of messages, for instance, whenever you're personalizing without being relevant to their buyer persona, you'll get responses from your prospect where they say, thanks so much for the message, not interested at this time, or appreciate the personalization, but it's not a fit, where they're saying like, hey, I appreciate that you knew that I went to Texas A&M, but like, I'm not going to buy your product because you are lucky or like it or not, we're in child ed natural. So I can't actually buy software because it doesn't fit my business need from a child. I need to buy it from an adult who knows what my business model is, who knows who I am, and who hooks it to in the email. And then the last two in here, demoing without facts and details and preparation, and planning without an execution plan. So all good litmus tests of if you're doing any of this in the sales cycle, that you're going to call out, to the parent ego state, parent nurturing ego state, where they want to sing you to sleep, but they don't want to buy your software because they don't see you as an equal in the conversation. So adult ego state, we'll briefly go into this. I have a couple of good examples of what you can do to bust through those ego states. But again, I put down here at the bottom a quick tip to understand whether you're in ego state, in the adult ego state, is when you find yourself asking questions to your prospect. Do you find yourself asking those questions because you want to blame, criticize, or prove an agenda? Or are you asking those questions because you genuinely want to know the answer to it? So I put a couple of different techniques in here. I cover them in different sessions, but a prospect pack is a good way to get out of the child ego state. So someone says, for instance, send me an email, and you say, or whenever you're at the bridge of a cold call, you can say, how about this? You give me the next 20 seconds to give you my best dog and pony show on, who Okta is and why I thought we might be a good fit for your team over at Oracle. And at the end of that 20 seconds, you can tell me whether you like to continue the conversation from there. Is that fair? But it's like essentially instigating some kind of pact or very logical, adult-driven agreement with your prospect of how you're going to behave within the selling process. Elephant in the room is a great technique if you want to call out what you think your prospect's actually thinking. We give a lot of false objections and shallow objections that aren't the true objection in the sales process when we're being prospected into. So a great example is, I walk up to someone with a clipboard, or someone with a clipboard walks up to me. They say, hey, can you sign this thing? And I pretend like I'm on the phone, right? Because I don't want to stop with the clipboard. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want, but I don't want any. So an elephant in the room is you giving your best guess as to what's going on in the situation so that you can be in the adult ego state and call out to the adult ego state in another of let's kind of treat each other like gentlemen, so to speak. Classic role diffusion, where you are calling out something that you are doing before you're doing it. So a great example is not to be the sleazy sales rep who tries to feature blast you right off the bat, but we do have this one thing to our product that I think might be a fit for you, et cetera, here, where you're basically calling out the negative things that are typically done within a role. And you're saying it beforehand to where you're diffusing that mentality that I have no self-awareness and proving to your prospect that you know how this can come off. So if I say that I'm basic, the last thing that people think is that I'm basic because I have that self-awareness. So classic role diffusion is a good way to do that. Asking your prospects what changed. If they say, sometimes prospects, or I have a tendency in the prospecting, behavior of, I'm looking to buy something, and I tell someone sing them some sweet song about like, oh, this all looks good. And let's, look forward to buying it on the 25th. The 25th rolls around and they're wondering what happened because I ghosted them. You can call someone out and say like, hey, let's hit the rewind button. Let's go back a little bit. What changed? Because whenever we talked on the 12th, it sounded like, to me at least, that you were interested in moving forward. So I just want to know what changed here and make sure I didn't mess anything up. So basically calling out with an adult nature to the adult nature in your prospect, because a child and a parent can ghost you. An adult cannot, because they have respect for themselves and respect for others. So they want to treat everyone in a very, very above board, respectful manner. Pulling down the covers, and I'll do one more and then we can close out. Pulling down the covers is basically, we have a tendency whenever we are selling into someone, for some reason, to not ask the really tough questions. So a lot of times we will, for instance, submit a proposal and we'll know we're not going to win the deal, but we're just submitting it and then we're just waiting to hear back, even though we think that something negative is going on. So I remember a quote that I read once that said, the 5 most important minutes of any meeting is the 5 minutes after you walk out or after the meeting is over, whenever who you're selling into, the prospect, turns to their friend and says, what did you think of that presentation? So whatever that real story is that they are dialoguing about after the salesperson has left the room, That is the 5 most important minutes of any meeting, and the 5 minutes that the salesperson needs to understand to be able to effectively sell. But it can be really scary because sometimes we don't want to ask the questions because we don't want to know the answers. So we can slip into a child ego state where we're pulling the cover over our heads because we're scared of the answer, and we're just kind of hoping in the off chance that it will close. So a technique that I deploy a lot is what's called pulling down the covers, where I say, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this question, but are you going to buy? I get the feeling that this is a deal, like this is not good for you and that you're going to go with this competitor. Am I crazy in thinking that? But I basically say, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this question and say, are you going to buy? Or, are you feeling this way? Or are you doing this? Or like, are you not going to move forward? Or, are you going to delay until Q4? And basically giving your best shot on goal on what you think is happening, because it shows a level of A, confidence, but B, that you're self-aware and you can read the situation and you actually get the answer. Because if they're not going to buy or they're going to push till Q4, you should know now, right? So it's a hard exercise, but if you could pull down the covers and ask the tough questions that you need to ask, because at least in my experience, whenever you ask these tough questions, people 99.9% of the time have the respect back for you that they will be willing to answer those because, they just want to be above board with you because you started in an adult ego state. So they want to finish it. And then the last one that I use a lot is maybe it's just me. I say this a lot in my breakup emails. I say, maybe it's just me, but I'm getting the feeling that it's just not the best time to connect. Or maybe it's just me, but I'm getting the feeling like you aren't that into this. Or maybe it's just me, but I'm feeling like there's this thing, that you said that you're going to go a different direction. But basically preluding with maybe it's just me. And then again, giving the reality that you think it is, because you're a little bit falling on your sword. So your prospect, you're falling on your sword, and then you're also communicating in a very logical, rational, unemotional manner. I've had very difficult decisions, in the last, several years of my career. And every single time, I want to make sure that I'm in a logical, rational spot whenever I make it. And I'm not in an emotional spot and operating out of that ego state, because those ego states don't do the best for you whenever you're buying or whenever you're selling or whenever you're making any kind of jump into any decision. So you want to make sure that you start in the adult ego state by saying, maybe it's just me, but I'm feeling like you think that this session is a little bit too long and I should just wrap it up. So that's it. Thanks everyone so much for watching. Speaking of egos, I'm thinking about making the classic mistake of asking you to follow me on LinkedIn, but I just can't bear it. Never mind, I can. Go ahead and go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and go ahead and give me a follow. Or if you want to see more sales sessions like this, go to flipthescript.co and sign up and register. Hope you're having a great rest of your day.